Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Ray Marquina, aka the official Arcaneer, and in today's video, we're diving into an exciting topic: how to create a metadata-driven pipeline schedule using Microsoft's Fabric Data Factory. And the reason I'm creating this video is because scheduling pipelines in Fabric work a little bit differently than they did in Azure Data Factory or Synapse. So if you're coming off of that platform, I wanted to showcase this approach and walk you through the implementation step by step. Okay, to begin our process, I'm first going to navigate to our workspace so we can see what objects are inside. You're going to see that I have a notebook called NB Initial Load Definition. This is going to house my control table. I have our pipeline, which has all the sources that we're going to execute against. And I have my raw lakehouse, where we essentially store our control table and where we are going to land the data that we pull from our sources. So if I go into the notebook, let me scroll up here, you're going to see that it's pretty straightforward. All we're doing is we have a definition for our initial load table, and it's going to contain all the attributes that we need to support the sources that we're going to bring through. I then use a merge function to insert my data. And at the end here, I have a select statement just to bring back what it is we're going to be, what sources we're going to be using for this pipeline run. So here you can see that we have three sources. We have an Azure database, we have ADLS, and an API. So when I pass this into my pipeline, which I'm going to open up right now in my control table, you're going to see that these are the sources that we're going to pull on over. So before we dive a little bit more into our pipeline, let's talk about the lakehouse. So here's where you can see that where that Delta table has been created, and here you can see the data inside. And again, we can see that there are 4 rows active. And if we go to files, right, there's nothing landed here yet. So let's go ahead and let's run this pipeline, and we can talk through it a little bit more. So the first step is to call my lookup activity. And this is going to be calling that table initial load definition from raw. So I've established that connection. The next step is to filter for only active rows. So you can see that I have that condition where I'm saying as long as my isActive column is equal to 1, then I want it to return true. And in my for each activity, I have a switch statement, which is then used to add in the copy activity for the relevant source. So you can see that within my activities tab, I have a case statement for each of those sources that I'm passing in into my control table, looking for these specific values. Okay, so let's take a look and see that this is done. So here are the 3 sources that we brought over. You can see that we copied over ADLS. Copy data 1 is going to be for my SQL databases, and the wait 2 isn't really going to bring over data, but this is the API. I just haven't set that copy activity yet. But again, what I'm showcasing here is parallelly, I was able to pull in 3 sources. Now, if I go back to raw and I refresh, you're going to see I was able to bring over my customer and orders table from my Azure DB. And in my ADLS Gen 2, I was able to bring over the files for orders. So this is working as intended. So let's imagine that we want to put a schedule on this pipeline. Well, it's very easy to do that. You just navigate over to schedule, and you can see that I already have one on, but this by default would be set to off. You can set it on, and you can set the repeatability, whether it's going to be by the minute, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. You can set the time, and you can also set the time zone and the start and end date. Those are the options that you have to configure your pipeline. Now, where this might get a little bit confusing is you now have a metadata-driven pipeline. You have 3 sources that you're calling on, yet all 3 sources are going to have different schedules. Now what we need to do is we need to determine how best to break out those 3 sources into their different schedules using a metadata-driven pipeline approach. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to navigate over to parameters of our PL main pipeline, and we're going to add a brand new parameter called source. Let's go ahead and add that. And let me go ahead and save. Then what we're going to want to do is go back to our workspace, and we're going to create a brand new pipeline that we want to invoke with a schedule. So it's going to be source type specific. So let's imagine that we want to create a pipeline to invoke ADLS. All right, so this is only going to invoke my ADLS process in my metadata-driven pipeline here. So we'll create this new pipeline, and we will bring over the Invoke Pipeline Activity, and we'll say Invoke Pipeline ADLS. We'll go to Settings. We'll grab our Fabric connection. We'll set our workspace, and we'll set the pipeline that we want to call. This is going to be PL main. And because we added that parameter, it's now going to ask us for a value that we want to pass in when we invoke this pipeline itself. So because this is ADLS, the value that we had in our control table to pass this in, or for us to trigger in our switch statement, is also going to be ADLS. So that's all we need to put here. So let me go ahead and save. And now we have our pipeline that is going to trigger for the switch statement. But we're not quite done yet. Let's go back to main. And now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to modify this filter so that we're only filtering based on the pipeline that we are invoking. So let me copy the code that I have written for this, and then we can talk through it a little bit. So it's going to be best to read this from the bottom up. So here you can see what I've essentially done is said, if my item is active is equal to 1, so that's still going to stay, and my source type is equals to my parameter source. So again, because we're hard coding ADLS, ADLS is going to trigger true. And then I wrap it all with an OR that basically says if my source parameter is empty, then also return true. And what that means is if I don't run anything, then the filter is going to do nothing more than just this is active equal to 1. But if I do pass in an item that is equal to my parameter, it's just going to filter for that expression. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now if we go, let me save this as well. And then let me go to my lakehouse. Okay, we can see that there's nothing there right now. And previously, if I were to run the PL main pipeline, we would see both the API, the SQL Server, as well as the ADLS being populated. Well, I should say all three rather than both. So we would see all three getting populated. Now, with this new method and the filter that we added, the filter logic that we added, this should now only specify that we are trying to land data for ADLS. So if we click on our out, okay, so we can now see that this pipeline has completed. If I go to the output, let me get into our pipeline run ID, and this should hopefully let us know. Oh, let me close out of this. And this should let us know what was executed. So if we look at the activity, what you see is the activity name only copy ADLS was executed. And if we go to our lakehouse, right, we should only see that the pro ADLS orders was brought over. Again, because we've added the filter and this new pipeline, that would allow us to explicitly run the ADLS Gen 2. So now if I want to set a schedule specifically for ADLS Gen 2 that differs from everything else, now I can go here. I can specify that I want it daily. Let's say I want it for 140, and let's say I want it starting today and I want it ending at the end of the month. Right now, I can give this its own independent schedule with a metadata-driven pipeline activity. And we can carry on, right? We can continue to do this process for as many sources as we have, but this is the approach that you're going to need to take to create more schedules based on the number of sources that you're going to have, right? The hope is maybe you have some sources that can run at the same time, or it doesn't matter, but this is how you're going to be able to get around making sure that things don't run all at once if that is your requirement. So the other thing I should mention, right, one thing I did here is I went to PL main and I added a schedule here. It's probably not going to make sense for us to keep this schedule on, as now we have these invoked pipelines. They're going to be able to handle the schedule for us. And that's it for today's video. I hope you found this walkthrough on setting up a metadata-driven pipeline schedule in Fabric helpful. This approach really does highlight the flexibility and power of metadata-driven designs, especially when combined with Fabric's unique scheduling capabilities. And listen, if you'd like me to create more in-depth videos on building metadata-driven pipelines, covering setup, design principles, and best practices, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to dive deeper into the topic. As always, don't forget to like this video, and if you found it useful, please subscribe to the channel for more tips and tutorials on Fabric, data engineering, and automation. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.